What happens when you tell your boss, your dangerous, unreadable, insanely attractive, completely off-limits boss, that you have a date? If your boss is Seojun Ha, the answer is simple. He tells you to cancel it, quietly. In a voice that empties the room, you refuse, in front of everyone. And then you come back to your desk and find a single red tulip and a note that says, "I'll be your date. Dress warm." Now what do? Get your cup of coffee and sit back. You want to see what Elsie Wade does. Chapter 1. The wind off Lake Michigan didn't care about your ambitions. Elsie Wade had learned that early. It hit her now the same way it hit everyone else. Sideways, mean, like it had a personal issue. She pulled her coat tighter and looked up at the building in front of her. 42 floors of glass and steel catching the gray Chicago morning sky. Hassung International, the letters pressed in gold above the revolving doors like a dare. She breathed out, watched her breath disappear. You didn't come this far to stand on a sidewalk, she told herself. Move. She moved. Growing up on the South Side, Elsie had learned two things very young. One, the city was beautiful the way a knife was beautiful. Two, nobody was coming to hand you anything. She watched her mother learn that the hard way. 3 jobs, 2 buses, 1 daughter she was determined to raise right. Elsie could still see her mother's hands at the kitchen table late at night, lotion cracked, tired, sorting bills like they were a puzzle that kept changing its own pieces. Her mother never complained, not once. Elsie had made a quiet promise to those hands. I'll build something different. She meant it. So she studied, got her associates, then her bachelor's, took every administrative certification she could find, worked her way from a receptionist desk at a freight company to an executive secretary at one of Chicago's most powerful import conglomerates. Clean on paper, and today was day one. The lobby was marble and controlled temperature and the kind of silence that only money could buy. People moved through it like they already knew the rules. Elsie signed in at the front desk, clipped her visitor badge to her lapel, and rode the elevator to the 31st floor without touching the walls. She was good at not touching walls. The meeting was already in progress when she was shown in. 6 men around a long conference table. Suits that cost more than her rent. A projection screen at the front showing numbers, port locations, shipping routes. One man at the head of the table, still watchful 30-something, who didn't look up when she entered. She sat in the chair near the door, opened her laptop, and started typing. The meeting was strange. She kept her face neutral and her fingers moving, but something about it settled wrong in her stomach the way bad food does. The harbor references, the amounts attached to cargo descriptions that didn't match standard manifests. The way 2 of the men exchanged a look when a particular number appeared on screen. She typed everything, and then, without planning to, because she genuinely wasn't a woman who planned to cause problems, problems just found her, she stopped. She scrolled back up to slide 4. She looked at it. Then, without raising her eyes from her screen, "Sir!" Silence. 6 heads turned. "You've spelled negotiation wrong on slide 4. She let one beat pass. "Also, I won't be typing the section about the harbor, just so we're clear." The room went so quiet she could hear the ventilation system. She kept her eyes on her screen. She could feel the temperature change. She could feel the specific weight of 6 men looking at her, including the one at the head of the table, whose attention felt different from the others, heavier, more deliberate, like being studied rather than watched. 10 seconds passed. Then he laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not the kind of laugh men use to reclaim a room. A real one, surprised out of him, that lasted only a moment before he pressed his mouth flat and looked away. But everyone in the room had heard it, and judging by the looks on their faces, none of them had heard it before. The meeting ended shortly after. Elsie was preparing to be escorted from the building. She'd already mentally drafted an explanation for her mother when his assistant appeared at her elbow. "Mr. Ha would like to offer you a position. Personal secretary, effective Monday." She blinked. The man across the room glanced at her once. Unreadable. Then he picked up his phone and walked out. By the time she reached the elevator, 2 different people had given her the same look. The kind you give someone who has just, without realizing it, walked directly toward the edge of something. She should have been frightened. She wasn't. Yet. If you've ever walked into a room knowing it could change everything, you already know exactly how Elsie feels right now. Drop where you're watching from in the comments. And stay close, Because what's coming next? Nobody in that building saw it coming. Nobody. Chapter 2 Monday came fast. Elsie arrived 8 minutes early, which she considered late. The 31st floor at 8 in the morning was already humming. Phones, keyboards, low conversations in at least 3 languages. She found her new desk outside Seojun Ha's office, set her bag down, and looked at the setup. Good chair, 2 monitors, a view of the skyline that on any other day she might have stopped to appreciate. She sat down and got to work. She'd spent the weekend learning everything publicly available about Hachung International. Import and export, electronics, textiles, medical equipment, offices in Seoul, Tokyo, Hamburg, Chicago. Revenue that looked healthy from a distance. Leadership that kept a very low public profile, which in her experience either meant they were boring or they had excellent reasons not to be visible. She was already guessing it wasn't the boring one. Seojin's schedule came through at 8:15. Back to back, calls, meetings, a lunch that had been moved twice. She reorganized 2 conflicts, flagged a travel document with an expired clearance, and had a revised version of the week waiting in his inbox before he arrived at 8:45. He walked past her desk without stopping. She went back to her screen. 20 minutes later, Wade. She walked into his office. He was standing at the window with a coffee he hadn't touched, looking at something in the middle distance. He didn't look at her when he spoke. The travel document. The clearance expired on the 3rd. I flagged it and sent the updated version. You reorganized the Tuesday calls. There was a 90-minute overlap. I moved the Berlin call to Wednesday when their afternoon opens up. I included the time zone conversion. A pause. Fine. She went back to her desk. Fine. That was how most of their early interactions went. Precise. Professional. She answered what he asked and didn't volunteer more. He didn't do small talk. She didn't either. At least not with people she didn't trust yet, which was most people. There'd been someone once. Someone she'd let herself be easy with. Open in the way she rarely allowed. He'd had a good face for it. Warm, patient, the kind of man who asked follow-up questions and remembered what you'd said 2 weeks ago. She'd believed in him completely, which, she now understood, had been the point. You don't get used effectively unless you first get trusted. She had trusted beautifully. She didn't do that anymore. Every evening before she left, she sat in her car in the parking structure and opened a second phone, typed out a brief summary, sent it to a contact saved only as D. The contact always responded quickly, always warm, always grateful. Good work. Stay in position. You're doing the right thing. She told herself he was right. She almost believed it. What she didn't examine too closely, not yet, was the specific feeling of typing those messages. How her hands moved a little slower each time. How stay in position had started to sound less like encouragement and more like a leash. She closed the phone, went home, made dinner, read 3 pages of a self-help book she'd had for 8 months, fell asleep telling herself everything was under control. By Wednesday, she'd met Ryo Matsuda, Seojin's right hand, a quiet man with a stillness that reminded her of deep water. He appeared at her desk that afternoon, stood on the other side of it without being invited, and looked at her the way you look at something you're trying to decide is a threat or an inconvenience. You've been reorganizing his calendar, he said. It's my job. Don't overstep. Overlapping calls and expired travel clearances are also his problem. I fixed them. That's not overstepping. That's secretarial work. He looked at her for another moment. Then he left. She exhaled slowly and went back to her screen. Lena, one of the financial analysts on the floor, the only other woman who'd made direct eye contact with Elsie since Monday, stopped by near the end of the day. She set a coffee on the edge of the desk like she was leaving an offering. Rio talked to you, Lena said. Not a question. Briefly. He talks to everyone new, more than once, usually. She paused. Her eyes were kind in the way that people's eyes are when they're trying to warn you without saying the thing directly. Don't get comfortable. I'm not the comfortable type, Elsie said. Lena smiled, small, a little sad, and walked away. Thursday, late afternoon, the office had thinned out. Elsie was finishing a briefing document when she noticed Sojun standing at the far window. Not the one facing the street, but the one on the east side of his office that faced a half-finished building 2 blocks over. He was just looking at it. Still, in a different way than his usual stillness, not controlled, just present. She knocked on the open door. He didn't startle. The briefing's done. Anything else before I go? He didn't answer immediately. Do you know what that building is? She looked. Steel frame, maybe 20 floors, not yet clad. New development, mixed use, I think. The permits went through in October. He was quiet for a moment. The original design was different, he said, almost to himself. Better. She looked at the side of his face, then back at the building. She had approximately 12 follow-up questions. She didn't ask any of them. She said, "Good night, Mr. Ha," and walked out. She was halfway to the elevator when she was almost certain, the quiet sound of him exhaling, like he'd been holding something and had only just let himself put it down. She didn't look back. But she thought about the whole drive home. The way a man who ran a 42-floor operation had looked at an unfinished building like it was the one thing in the city that actually belonged to him. Two people in that office, both of them performing, both of them exhausted by it, and something, small, dangerous, not yet named, had just quietly noticed the other one. Chapter 3. The document wasn't meant for her. She knew that the moment she picked it up, it had slid from a folder Rio had left on the edge of her desk, probably by accident, probably in a hurry. A single stapled packet, face down. She should have left it there, should have waited for him to come back and collect it. She turned it over. Shipping manifest, standard header, Hasung International letterhead, and then the contents. 12 rows of cargo descriptions that made no sense next to their declared weights, their port destinations, their equipment classifications. Odessa, Tangier, a number with 8 figures attached to a name she didn't recognize. And below that, 3 more names she did. Not from the company, not from any public record. From a federal indictment she'd read 2 years ago while helping Damien with the case briefing. Her hands were steady. She was proud of that later. She walked to the copy room, photographed every page, returned the packet to exactly where it had fallen, and sat back down at her desk, all in 4 minutes. She didn't rush. Rushing was how you got caught. That evening in her car, she sent everything to D. The response came in 40 seconds. This is everything. This is exactly what we needed. Stay in position. And then a minute later, his name appeared at the top of the screen the way it always did when he followed up. Not D, the full contact name she'd never bothered to change because changing it would have meant admitting something. Damien Cole. She stared at the name for a moment. Just a moment. Damien Cole, who had a good face and patient eyes and remembered everything you told him, who had called her 8 months ago, warm and familiar, like no time had passed at all, who had told her about Haesung, the investigation, the need for an inside source, how she was perfectly positioned, how she'd be protected, how they'd be a team again, how he missed her. She had told herself she was doing it for the right reasons. She was still telling herself that. She drove home without turning on the radio. The next morning, Seojin's assistant, not Elsie, his separate personal assistant for internal matters, sent a calendar invite to the whole floor, 30 minutes, all senior staff, no subject line. Elsie was senior staff now. She sat at the end of the conference table with her notebook and kept her breathing even. Sojin came in last, which he always did, and sat down without preamble. "We have a problem," he said. Not dramatic, just factual, the way he said most things. Someone inside this organization has been passing information to an outside party. We don't know how long. We're finding out. The room shifted. Elsie didn't shift. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at a point slightly above the center of the table, the way he did when he was thinking out loud rather than performing. That was the thing about him she'd noticed. He had a version of himself he wore in rooms, and a version that occasionally slipped out when he forgot to hold it. This was the second version. "I'm not interested in why," he continued. "People have reasons. Reasons don't change outcomes." He paused. "Whoever it is, I hope they understand what they've started. Quiet, specific. Not a threat dressed up as one, just a plain statement of fact from a man who had never needed volume to make a room feel small." Elsie wrote something meaningless in her notebook. Her handwriting was perfectly even. She was extraordinary at keeping her face still, had learned it young, in classrooms where being readable meant being a target, and kept the skill well into adulthood. Nothing moved on her face. Nothing. But under the table, her knee was pressed hard against the chair leg. The meeting ended. People filtered out with the careful body language of people pretending they weren't afraid. Elsie gathered her notebook and stood. Wade. She turned. Stay for a minute. Everyone else left. He poured 2 cups of tea from the set on the credenza. He'd started doing that, she'd noticed, when he wanted a conversation to feel informal, and set one on the table near her. He didn't sit. He stood by the window, the half-finished building visible behind him, and drank his tea. Anything unusual this week? He asked. Casual, mild. No, she said, nothing unusual. He nodded slowly, looked at the building, let the silence sit there between them the way he was comfortable doing, and she was not. Good, he said finally. Keep your eyes open. She left. Damien called at 9 that night. She almost didn't answer. You did good, he said. She could hear the satisfaction in his voice. We're close, Elsie. A few more weeks. He knows someone's leaking, she said. He suspects. That's different. Stay calm. Stay close. Damien, we're almost there. This is what we planned. We, he said it so easily, like they were still something, like she was still the woman who had believed every word from that particular mouth. Right, she said. Good night. She hung up, sat in the dark for a while, then she went to bed. She didn't sleep for a long time. The clock had started. She just didn't know yet whose time was running out. Chapter 4. A month into the job, and Elsie had developed 2 problems. The first was professional. Damien was pushing harder, more detail, faster turnaround, documentation she had to work to access without raising flags. She was walking a line that kept getting thinner. Every evening in the parking structure, she'd sit with the second phone and feel the particular exhaustion of someone who is playing a role so well they've started to forget which part is performance. The second problem was standing at the window of his office at 7:15 in the morning when she arrived, already dressed, already deep in something, turning when she knocked and saying, "Good, come in," like she was the thing he'd been waiting on. That was the problem. He'd started including her in meetings she had no administrative reason to attend. Not all of them, not the ones with the harbor numbers and the careful silences, but the operational ones, the logistics reviews, the vendor negotiations where things got contentious and people stopped being polite. She'd asked Lena about it once, obliquely. Lena had looked at her over a coffee cup. He's never done that before. Done what? Kept someone close. She paused. Ryo's been with him 6 years. That's different. That's loyalty that was tested. This is something else. Elsie didn't ask what something else meant. She already had a guess she didn't want confirmed. The moment that changed the temperature happened on a Tuesday. She was sitting across from him while he reviewed a supplier contract she'd flagged. He read it the way he read everything, thorough, unhurried, and then he set it down and said the shipping terms on page 7 were acceptable. They're not, she said. He looked up. The liability clause shifts after 60 days. If there's a delay on their end past that window, we absorb the cost. It happened twice last year with this supplier. I checked the records. It'll happen again. He looked at her for a long moment. I reviewed this. I know. You're disagreeing with my review. I'm telling you what the clause means. You can disagree with that if you want. Something moved across his face. He looked back at the contract. Read page 7 again. Set it down. You're supposed to agree with me, he said, not angry, almost amused in the dry, controlled way that was the closest he got to it openly. You're paying me to be accurate, she said, not agreeable. His mouth did something, not quite a smile, something adjacent to it that he pulled back before it fully arrived. He initialed the contract revision without another word. She went back to her desk and stared at her screen for 10 seconds before she could concentrate again. Ryo found her in the break room that afternoon. He didn't get coffee. He just stood near the counter with his arms crossed and waited until the other person in the room left. He's testing you, he said. She didn't pretend not to know what he meant. I know. You don't, Ryo said. Not fully. He looked at her with the flat, assessing expression she'd gotten used to. Not hostile, just careful, the way cautious people are careful. Attention from him is not the same as safety. Don't let one feel like the other. She held his gaze. Is that a warning or a threat? He picked up someone else's forgotten cup, looked at it, put it back down. It's an observation, he said, from someone who's been here long enough to know the difference. He left. Elsie poured her coffee and stood there a minute. She thought about the way Seo-jun had almost smiled, the way Ryo had just looked at her like she was something fragile that didn't know it yet. She went back to her desk. 3 days later, she stayed late finishing a quarterly brief. The floor was mostly empty. She was passing the document room, not the main filing area, the secondary one off the back corridor that required a separate key card, when she noticed the light was on inside. 11:45 at night. She kept walking, but she slowed just enough to see, through the narrow glass panel in the door, Rio at the back shelf, pulling folders, stacking them on the table, photographing pages, then returning them. Careful, systematic. She walked to the elevator. She didn't tell Damien. She told herself it was because she wasn't certain what she'd seen. But the real reason sat heavier than that. If Rio was the leak, Damien would redirect everything toward him. And something in her didn't want to hand that over. Not yet. Not without understanding it. Which meant she was already protecting people she wasn't supposed to protect. That was how she knew the second problem was getting worse. Damien called the next morning before she reached the office. I need the vendor network, full list, contact names, transaction history. That's deep access. It'll take time. You have a week. Damien, a week, Elsie. The warmth was still there, thin over something harder underneath. We're so close. Don't slow down now. She hung up and sat in the parking structure for a minute longer than usual. Trapped between a man she was betraying and the man who had sent her to do it. And somewhere in the middle of those two facts, something she couldn't name yet was quietly taking up space. She got out of the car, went upstairs, knocked on his open door. He looked up from his desk. The quarterly brief is done, she said. You'll want to review section 3 before the Thursday call. Sit down, he said, and pushed the brief aside. Tell me what's wrong with it before I read it. She sat down, she told him, and for 20 minutes, while Chicago moved 31 floors below them, they just worked. Two people who were both, in their own ways, running out of time, neither of them saying so. Chapter 5. It happened on a Thursday. Elsie had slept 4 hours the night before. Damien had called twice. She'd sent 2 encrypted messages, drafted 3 memos, reorganized a collapsing Friday schedule, and sat through a 2-hour meeting where she'd smiled at the right moments and written things in her notebook that meant nothing. She was running on coffee and nerve endings. She walked into Sojun's office at 4:30 to drop off the afternoon briefing, and she said it without thinking, without planning. It just came out the way things do when you're too tired to manage your own mouth. I need tomorrow off. He looked up from his desk. I have a date, she added. Casual, automatic. The room changed. She watched it happen on his face, and Sojun Ha had an excellent face for nothing, a face trained to give away less than anyone around him. But this moved through him in a sequence she could actually track. First, something still and cold, the shutting of a door. Then something underneath that, something that had no business being there, something unguarded and brief and very, very human. Then it was gone, all of it, replaced by the version of him the building knew. You can't take tomorrow. I have the hours, she said. I checked the policy. The Tanaka brief needs, it's done. I finished it this morning. His jaw was tight. There's the Friday call. Lena can cover the notes. She's done it before. Silence. He set down his pen the way people set things down when they're deciding something. Cancel it, he said. Quiet. The specific quiet that made rooms feel smaller. The floor outside his glass office had gone very still. People who hadn't been listening were now listening. Elsie held his gaze. She thought about 4 hours of sleep. She thought about Damien's voice on the phone. She thought about all the things she was doing and all the things she was carrying and how she had not in 6 weeks asked for a single thing. She did not cancel it. She picked up her briefing folder and walked back to her desk. The floor remained very, very quiet for the rest of the afternoon. She found it at 6:15 when everyone else had gone. A single red tulip laid across her keyboard, and under it, a folded note, his handwriting, which she recognized from the margins of documents he returned to her. Narrow, precise letters. I'll be your date. Dress warm. She stood there for a long time. She should say no. She knew exactly what she should do. Fold the note, leave the flower, go home, be sensible. She was a woman who had been burned by her own softness before. She knew what happened when she let people in through small openings. She took the tulip home. She dressed warm. He took her to the roof of a building she didn't recognize. Not Haesung. Somewhere smaller, quieter, a converted warehouse on the west side with a rooftop that had a gas heater, string lights that looked like they'd been hung recently and somewhat hastily, and a folding table with two covered dishes on it. He had cooked. She could tell by the specific confidence with which he removed the covers and the equally specific way he did not make eye contact immediately after. She looked at the food, then at him. "You cooked," she said. "A restaurant prepared the ingredients," he said. "I assembled. That's still cooking. The distinction matters." She laughed. Really laughed. The kind that comes from your stomach, the kind she didn't let out often. He watched her do it with an expression she couldn't name, but that made her look away first. The food was not good. She ate all of it. They talked for a long time after, the city spread below them, lights blurring into fog at the edges. He told her about Seoul. Architecture school, 5 years, the happiest he'd been. He described a building he'd designed for his thesis, a community center in a neighborhood near where his mother grew up. He spoke about it the way people speak about things they've lost. "What happened to your father?" she asked, because she'd seen the absence of him in every room. A long pause. "He was killed," he said simply. "And then I came home. And then there wasn't time to feel it." She nodded. She understood that specific kind of grief, the kind you postpone until it fossilizes inside you. "Sojin," she said. His name, not his title. First time. He looked at her. She almost said it. The messages, Damien, all of it. The words were right there, solid and real and ready. She wanted to say them. She could feel how much she wanted to. She didn't. "I'm glad you didn't fire me," she said instead. He looked at her for a moment. "So am I." The city hummed below them. Neither of them moved. The almost kiss lived in the 6 inches of cold air between them, and then quietly dissolved when she looked down at her hands. She wasn't winning anything. She was falling. Fast. Without a plan for landing. Chapter 6. Her phone rang at 5:47 in the morning. It was Aunt Bea, her mother's oldest friend, the woman who checked in when Elsie couldn't. Her voice was careful in the way that people are careful when they're about to say something that will change your morning. "Baby, your mama collapsed. They've got her at Mercy." Elsie was in the car in 4 minutes. The waiting room at Mercy General was the kind of place that stripped everything away. Fluorescent lights, chairs bolted to the floor, a television in the corner showing morning news nobody was watching. Elsie sat with her coat still on and her bag in her lap and did the things she'd learned as a child. She held herself very still and let the feelings back up behind her ribs where they couldn't cause any trouble. Her mother was stable. Cardiac episode, not a full attack. They'd know more in a few hours. She called work, rearranged everything from her phone in the parking structure, sent Seojun's assistant a note. "Family emergency, handled remotely today." She did not call Sojun directly. She went back inside and sat down and waited. The bill estimate came 4 hours later. She looked at the number, looked at her bank balance in her head, looked at the number again. She set the paper face down on the chair beside her. By the time her mother was moved to a room, awake, embarrassed, already arguing with the nurse about the IV placement, the paperwork at the front desk had been marked paid in full, anonymously, a wire transfer earlier that morning. Elsie stood at the billing window and read the confirmation twice. She knew. Before she confirmed anything, before she made a single call, she knew. She found him at the office the next morning. He was at his desk reviewing something, and he looked up when she walked in with the same calm he always had. She closed the door behind her, set the billing statement on his desk and slid it toward him. He glanced at it, looked back up. "No, it was you. I know it was you," she said. "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the statement, not at her, and she could see him deciding how much to give, weighing it. "You needed something handled," he said finally. That was all he offered. No performance, no deflection dressed as one. Just that, plain, direct, his eyes on hers when he finally looked up. She had spent a year after Damien rebuilding the wall she kept around herself, brick by careful brick. She felt one section of it fall. She didn't plan what happened next. Neither did he. He came around the desk slowly, the way you move when you're giving someone the chance to step back. She didn't step back. She stood her ground the way she always did, except this time standing her ground meant something entirely different. He stopped in front of her, close. His eyes moved over her face like he was reading something, checking, making sure. And then his hand came up and touched her jaw, just his fingertips. careful in a way she hadn't expected from a man who ran a room the way he did, like she was something he didn't want to damage. Elsie, he said, just her name. Quiet. She reached up and covered his hand with hers. She felt him exhale, and then there was no more distance between them at all. He kissed her slowly. No urgency, no performance. The kind of kiss that asks a question first and waits for the answer. She answered. Her hands found the front of his shirt and she held on, and he pulled her closer with one arm around her waist, like he'd been wanting somewhere to put it for a long time. They stayed like that until the kiss changed, deepened, became something warmer and more honest than either of them had allowed themselves in a long time. His forehead came down to hers when they finally paused, both of them breathing, neither of them speaking. He pulled back just enough to look at her. She looked back. No armor, no careful face, nothing managed or controlled. Just her. He seemed to understand the weight of that because something in him went very still, the way he went still when something mattered. He took her hand, led her away from the desk, away from the office, away from all the careful professional distance they'd maintained for weeks. The rest of the evening existed only between them, quiet and unhurried, two people finally setting down everything they'd been carrying. There was no glamour in it. There was something better than glamour. There was honesty in the way they moved together, in the things they didn't need to say, in the simple fact of two people who had been performing for so long, finally, completely stopping. He held her after. She let herself be held, which was the harder thing, harder than anything she'd done in that building. She lay in the dark and listened to his breathing even out and felt for 1 hour like none of the rest of it existed. His name on her screen in the morning felt like a different language. Damian Cole, one new message. She opened it. Final package. This week. Offshore accounts, shell companies, all the names, everything. A pause in the typing, then, don't make me ask twice. Your mother's first accident was a warning. The next one won't be. She read it 3 times. The room was warm. Seljan was in the shower. Morning light was coming through the window in long, flat lines across the floor. She sat with the phone in her hands and understood, fully, finally, the kind of understanding that arrives cold and complete, what she was looking at. There was no immunity deal. There had never been one. Damien hadn't recruited her because she was positioned well. He'd positioned her. The job, the access, the trust she'd been asked to build and then break. All of it engineered. She wasn't an informant. She was a tool he'd picked up and aimed and was now getting impatient with. And her mother. She set the phone down, pressed her hands flat on the table, breathed. She had spent years being careful, years being controlled and contained and professional, years not letting anyone close enough to use against her. She looked at the phone. Then she looked at the door where the shower was still running. She was shattered. She could feel every piece of it. But underneath the shattered thing, something else was waking up. Something that had her mother's hands and her mother's jaw and absolutely no interest in being anyone's instrument. For the first time since this started, Elsie Wade was furious. Chapter 7, Rio put the folder on Siljan's desk at 8 in the morning without saying anything first. That was how Siljan knew it was bad. Rio always said something first. He opened it. Trace transmissions, dates, times, file sizes, encrypted messages sent from inside the building from a device not registered on the company network. A second phone, the analysis said. Used consistently, always in the evenings, always from the parking structure on sublevel 2. And at the bottom of the page, highlighted in the simple administrative way that Rio did everything. Her name, Elsie Wade. Seljan closed the folder. He sat with it for a long time. Long enough that Rio, who never fidgeted, shifted his weight once. The morning moved outside the window, Chicago going about its business, indifferent as always. He thought about the rooftop, the way she'd laughed at his cooking, the way she'd looked at him in the dark when he told her about soul and hadn't offered him anything easy or false in return. The morning light across the floor, her hand covering his. He thought about how extraordinary she was at keeping her face still. Get her, he said. She came in the way she always did, composed, notebook in hand, reading him first before she stepped fully through the door. He was standing at the window. He didn't turn around when she entered. He heard her stop. He turned then, looked at her across the office, the width of it between them, which had never felt like much before. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't put the folder on the desk between them like evidence. He just looked at her for a moment, and she looked back, and he watched her understand. He asked her one question. Was any of it real? The words landed quietly. That was the thing about the way he spoke when it mattered. No volume, no edge, just the question itself sitting there in the room, waiting. She opened her mouth. The truth was right there. He could almost see it, the way her chest moved, the way her eyes changed for just a fraction of a second, something breaking the surface. The truth was there, and she was about to say it. Then the reflex kicked in. 1/2 second. The same half second she'd been using for 6 weeks to keep her face still and her voice even and her hands steady. The half second that had kept her safe in every room she'd ever been afraid in. It lasted one beat too long. He saw it. He knew what it meant. Not guilt, not the absence of feeling, but something worse. Someone so practiced at protecting herself that even now, even here, the armor went up before the person inside it could stop it. He picked up his jacket from the chair. Sojun, his name, her voice finally cracking open on it. He walked out. She sat in his office for a long time after. She didn't chase him. She didn't know how to explain that, to herself or anyone. But she didn't. She sat in the chair across from his empty desk and looked at the view he looked at every day and understood something she hadn't before. This was what it cost, to be someone who couldn't be reached, to have the truth ready and still, let the reflex win. She had protected herself so well for so long that she'd done it at the exact moment protection was the cruelest possible choice. She sat with that. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't supposed to be. Her phone rang 40 minutes later. Ryo. She picked up because Rio never called her directly. His voice was stripped of its usual flatness. He's gone to the warehouse on Kinsey, alone. He's not answering. What's on Kinsey? A pause. The Choi family has been moving on our operations for 3 weeks. We think they tracked the leak back to us. Someone told them we were unstable. Someone gave them a window. Another pause. Damien Cole's name is in their communication logs. Elsie stood up. He walked in there alone, Rio said. And he's not. He's not trying to get out, Elsie. He switched his tracker off. She was already moving. How many entrances? 3. West loading dock, the fire exit on the north side, and the main door will be covered. Now, they'll expect him to run north. West dock is blind from the street. That's where they'll hold him. She was at her desk, pulling up the building schematics she had filed 3 weeks ago when Seoja had asked her to catalog all company-adjacent properties. She had been thorough. She was always thorough. There's a service corridor connecting the dock to the east utility room. Seoja knows it. It's in the original building plans. How do you know that? Because I read everything. She sent the file to Ryo's phone. Go in through the east. You have maybe 20 minutes. Elsie? His voice shifted. You know what you just did. She knew exactly what she'd done. Every back-channel contact, every piece of operational knowledge she'd gathered, the schematic she just sent, all of it traceable back to her access, to 6 weeks of careful watching. She had just burned everything she'd built, every layer of cover, gone. She'd saved his life with the same information she'd used to betray him. Go, she said. Now. She hung up, stood in the empty office. The city was gray outside the window, same as always. She sat down. She waited. There was nothing left to manage or protect. For the first time in a very long time, Elsie Wade had nothing left to hide behind. Chapter 8. Damien Cole was arrested on a Tuesday. Not by the Bureau he'd spent years manipulating. They were still building their case, still moving carefully through channels he knew too well. He was arrested on charges built from records he hadn't known existed. Financial documentation, communication logs, wire transfer histories going back 4 years, all of it packaged and handed to a federal prosecutor through a back channel that traced, ultimately, to Haesung International's internal files. The meticulous man, the one who kept everything documented, every transaction recorded, every conversation logged, had finally used his own records, just not to protect himself. Damien sat in an interview room and asked who had provided the documentation. The prosecutor smiled at him pleasantly and said nothing. Elsie's congressional hearing was on a Thursday morning in March. Cold still, Chicago not done with winter yet. She wore the Navy suit she saved for things that mattered. And she sat at the table in front of the committee and told them everything. She told them how she got the job. She told them about the second phone and the encrypted messages and the documents she photographed in the copy room in 4 minutes. She told them about the shipping manifests and the harbor numbers and every piece of information she had passed along over 6 weeks. She was clear and specific, and she did not soften anything. Then she told them the part they hadn't asked for. She told them she had fallen in love. She said it plainly, the way she said everything, not performing, not reaching for sympathy, just the fact of it, set on the table with everything else. That somewhere between correcting a man's spelling and sitting on a rooftop in the Chicago cold, she had stopped being an informant and become something she didn't have a clean word for. That the mission had become impossible, not because she was weak, but because she was honest, finally, with herself. That she would make every choice again. One of the committee members asked if she understood that statement complicated her immunity arrangement. Yes, she said. And you're making it anyway? She folded her hands on the table. Some things are worth more than immunity. The room was quiet for a moment. While Elsie was testifying, Seljun was in a small office in a building 3 miles away, across a table from a different federal representative. No hearing, no cameras, just paperwork and the particular silence of something large being quietly dismantled. He had been planning this for 2 years. The shell companies went first, dissolved through back channels, right? Their accounts flagged and handed over in full. Then the vendor network, the shipping routes, the names attached to the harbor manifests that Elsie had photographed in the copy room. He handed all of it over with the precision of a man who had been waiting for the right moment, who had kept records specifically for this purpose, which was why the records were so complete. He signed the last document and set the pen down. The representative across from him said, carefully, "You could have done this at any time." Sojin didn't answer that one. Rio found him afterward in the parking garage, sitting in his car with the engine off. He got in the passenger side without being invited, which was the most human thing Rio had ever done. They sat for a while without talking. Outside, the city moved the way it always did, indifferent, continuous, beautiful in its coldness. "You could have left any time," Rio said finally. Seljun looked at the concrete wall in front of the car. He thought about Seoul, the thesis building he'd designed that nobody would ever construct, the father he'd come home to bury without being allowed to grieve, the suit he'd worn like a costume for 3 years. He thought about a woman who corrected his spelling on her first day and didn't flinch in a room that was designed to make people flinch. "I needed to know what I was leaving for," he said. Rio was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once. Small, final, the way Rio acknowledged things that didn't require more words. They sat there a little longer. The city outside moved and hummed and carried on. Justice had arrived, not clean, not simple, not without cost. The kind that left marks, the kind that required something from everyone it touched, the kind Seljun had come to understand that meant something precisely because of that. He started the car. Chapter 9. 6 months is enough time for a city to forget. Chicago moved on the way Chicago always does. Another headline, another case, another name in the news cycle that faded by the following week. The Haesung building got new tenants. Lena took a job at a firm downtown and sent Elsie a brief, warm message that said only, "I knew you were different." Rio disappeared somewhere quiet, which felt right for him. Elsie took a communications consulting job at a nonprofit on the west side. Modest pay, good people. Work that let her sleep at night, which turned out to matter more than she'd understood when she was younger, and still believed that ambition and peace could occupy the same space without negotiating. She was doing fine. She told herself that every morning and by afternoon she mostly believed it. She almost didn't go in. She was passing through the north side on her way to a Saturday meeting, and the coffee shop was just there. Small, warm-looking, the kind of place with a hand-painted sign and a window full of condensation. The smell of something slightly burnt drifting through the door. Not bad burnt, comfortable burnt. The smell of someone still learning. She stopped on the sidewalk. Then she pushed the door open. The shop was quiet. 2 people at a corner table. Soft music she couldn't name. And behind the counter, in a green apron that was slightly too short, moving with the careful concentration of a man applying himself seriously, to something he was not yet good at? Sojun Ha. She stood in the doorway. He didn't look up immediately. He was focused on the espresso machine with an expression she recognized, the same one he wore reviewing contracts, precise and patient. He had bought the place. Of course he had bought the place. She didn't know why she was surprised. He slid a cup across the counter without looking up. I made it wrong on purpose, he said, so you'd have a reason to stay and correct me. She stood there for a moment. This man, this ridiculous, careful, complicated man in his too short apron who had dismantled a criminal empire with the same quiet precision he applied to everything, who had laughed on a rooftop over bad food, who had paid a hospital bill and called it something handled, who had asked her one question in a voice that still lived somewhere in her chest. She felt something loosen, something she'd been holding since the morning she sat in his empty office with nowhere left to hide. She walked to the counter and sat down. She picked up the cup, took a sip, set it down. You used oat milk, she said. I'm not allergic to dairy. He looked up then. Finally, his eyes found hers across the counter and stayed there, and his face did the thing it almost never did. It opened, fully. No performance, no careful distance, just him. I know, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then the corner of her mouth moved. Your espresso pull is too short, she said, and this cup is the wrong temperature. I know that too. You're going to need a lot of help. He held her gaze. I was counting on it. She stayed. Some people come into your life like a demolition. They take apart everything you built to keep yourself safe. And then if you're lucky, they hand you the blueprints for something better. Elsie Wade learned the city. Sojun Ha learned to leave it. Together, they learned the hardest thing of all, how to finally stop performing and simply be. If this story moved you, please give it a like and subscribe so you never miss the next one. We have more coming that will stay with you long after you finish. And before you go, drop your answer in the comments. Was Elsie wrong to fall in love, or was falling in love the only right thing she did? Let's talk about it.